The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, should Ontario's capital city be more like New York's biggest city and adopt congestion pricing? Then, some of the new Liberal MPPs will join us to discuss returning to Queen's Park with official party status for the first time in 7 years. And Nan Kiwanuka tells us all about Season 4 of The Thread. That's all ahead on The Agenda. Since it introduced congestion pricing in January, New York City has seen some impressive results. Fewer cars on the road, faster travel times, and millions in revenue. As Toronto faces its own congestion crisis, is it time for Ontario's capital city to reconsider its take on tolls? Let's ask Jennifer Keesmaat. She's the CEO of Collective Marquee and former chief planner for the City of Toronto. Maddie Simioticki, professor of geography and planning and director of the Infrastructure Institute at the University of Toronto, and Teresa Di Felice, assistant vice president of government and community relations at CAA South Central Ontario. And it's great to have you three back at our table here at TVO for what could be a very timely discussion for our capital city, but let's see. Sheldon, we're going to bring this graphic up here because congestion pricing came in January in New York City. It now costs about $9 a day to enter New York during peak hours. The results are in. This is only for January 2025. Let's see what has happened. 1 million fewer vehicles entered the most congested part of Manhattan. Travel times 10 to 30% faster at inbound river crossings. Bus service was faster and more reliable. Ridership on the weekend express bus service grew by more than 20%. In the first 27 days, this program generated apparently almost $50 million, which will go to the region's transit system. And it's on track to hit $500 million by the end of the year, unless President Trump gets his way and he comes in and cancels this. Stay tuned, everybody. Okay, Jennifer, if there's fewer cars on the road now, what happened to all those drivers? Where'd they go?
Well, they're taking the bus. You just saw that in your stats. They're getting on the bus. More people are carpooling. More people are walking to their destinations. And people are changing their travel patterns. That's really one of the most significant things that happens with congestion pricing, is that people think differently about how they're going to commute, when they commute. It's interesting to be implementing this at a moment when most people do have the option, many people do have the option of working from home. So you start to see a big shift in how people think about their commute and when they commute and when they get in their car. You know, years ago when we were advocating for this in the City of Toronto, I was on the CBC and someone called in. You know, we were talking about the power of pricing and congestion relief zones, and someone called in and said, if you do this, I'm going to have to start carpooling. That's the answer to your question.
And that is what you want.
That's the answer to your question, is that you change behavior by putting a price on something. And look, 20% increase in the number of people taking the bus in New York City. That is a really significant and transformative shift in modal split that transportation planners, spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to tweak routes, how to improve service, how to get the pricing right in order to see that kind of a transition. So I think what we've seen, and we've already seen it for decades in London, and we've seen it in Singapore, and we've seen it
in
London, UK, in Singapore, in Stockholm, is that when you introduce pricing, that you start to mix up how people think about using road infrastructure, and that's really powerful.
We should just say modal split is what people like you call those who drive versus those who take transit. Just a little translation there. Is this a good or bad news story?
The New York story is a great news story. It's working, and it's also changing minds and attitudes. When it first came in, people in New York City were generally opposed. You're starting to see the favorability go up. People see that it works, and that's been the pattern all around the world. London, Stockholm, Milan, Singapore. When these charging programs are first introduced, they're often unpopular. People are worried about how they are going to get around, if they're going to be priced off the road. And over time, when they see the results, that's what's so key about this. It's not just a new tax, it's actually improving and changing people's lives and experiences in cities. And when they start to see the positive results, then the favorability goes up, and people in polls and even in elections. In Stockholm, they had an election after it got brought in. Charging got brought in as a pilot, and afterwards they had an election, and it won, and it got maintained. So you can really start to see how people view their lives changing for the better, and these programs are working.
Teresa, same question. Is this a good or bad news story?
I think the New York story is a very interesting, because often we hear people say, oh, that's London or that's Singapore, but I think a lot of people in Toronto can feel more like-minded with New York City, right? It's a busy, bustling city, bigger than Toronto even. But, and so I think people are going to, once they hear about it, I don't think a lot of people in Toronto actually know about New York's congestion program. And then I think right now too, it's early. So people want to see some proof, and I think it's an interesting telltale for what could or could not happen in Toronto. That being said, there are some things that need to happen before you implement something like this.
So let me ask the obvious follow-up, which is you're here representing the Canadian Automobile Association. So do we assume that drivers are not happy about having to pay this money to go into the city?
Well, I think at CA, we always focus on safety, but we talk to our members about some of these issues like congestion pricing, how people get around. So our members get around by car, they get around by bike, they take transit, they walk, and we've definitely seen a huge shift in some of those ways of getting around since the pandemic. But in generally, if you ask people if they're supportive of tolls or congestion charges, no, they're not.
Right.
And I think that's something that we've talked about over a number of years, is what has to be in place, because otherwise it's just seen as very punitive. And currently we've got a lot of transit being built, which is really a precursor to how you get people to change their transportation behaviors or how they get around, but we don't have it where it needs to be yet in order to even bring in something at this point.
Maddie, does this pick on drivers?
I don't view it that way. I think it makes life better for those who continue to drive, and it gives others other options, it gives it funding, and it creates more space. At the moment, you can't run a viable bus service up the DVP or on the Gardiner Expressway. There's too much traffic. But lots of people would really benefit from being able to take public transit in those areas. And so a road charge gives the people who are on that road a faster and smoother and more reliable trip, which is really valuable. And it enables public transit. It encourages carpooling. So really, this extends the range of options that are available. I think it actually makes it better for drivers, not worse. And for those of us who do drive, when you're sitting in traffic, just think about how frustrating and how much of a waste of time and money that is. And just think how much you would benefit if that trip was reliable, if you didn't have to leave 2 hours early for a trip that should take an hour because you were worried about being late. That's just putting time back in everyone's day. And all of the goods and services in this region are more expensive because of the traffic, because all of that material is stuck in traffic as well. We can make all of that smoother. We can actually address affordability by starting to bring in a road charge as well.
Does it pick on suburbanites, and does it favor those who live in the city?
I was hoping you would also ask me this question about it picking on drivers and picking on suburbanites is a really critical question. I think that Teresa in some ways answered that question, which is that we like to think that there are transit users and drivers and people who walk and people who cycle. And in a big urban center, most of us do all those things. There's no such things as drivers and transit users. We have a whole variety of choices, and we use those choices. We use kind of the best mode at the best time. Getting down to a Raptors game, you're going to jump on the TTC. I think it's a bit different for suburbanites who live in environments where there isn't a lot of transit and where the assumption has been that they are going to use a car for every trip. Then it's a completely different question. So I think in the core of the city where we have lots of choices, including the choice of walking, and this is one of the things that I think is really underappreciated, is how much in cities like London, England, where there's amazing transit, but the biggest increase as a result of the congestion charges and the ultra-low emission zone has been people are walking longer, and they're cycling more, and they're taking more buses. Those are all things that are behavioral changes that are pretty easy to do. You don't need to build a big tunnel underground in order to get more people on the bus.
But let me talk to you about the politics of this, and you obviously at City Hall were neck deep in the politics of this issue. People do view this issue, I suspect, as creating winners and losers. And you had firsthand experience on this almost 10 years ago. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, well, for sure. What happened, we spent several years, my team is leading the transportation planning for the city, spent several years, and the infrastructure that's being built today, the shovels in the ground, that's all the work that we did because we saw the promise of delivering on the new transit infrastructure as needing to fit hand in glove with the congestion pricing. Of course, it takes much longer to get the transit built, but delivering on that promise was absolutely critical and combined with bringing congestion pricing forward. So we spent a couple of years with our then mayor, John Tory, and I will tell you it was not intuitive for him to support congestion pricing, but he kept saying, bring me the data, bring me the analysis. And the great thing about congestion pricing is there is multi-generational data at this point that we can go to, and every case in every city is almost identical. To Maddie's point, people oppose congestion pricing before it exists. Once it's brought in, it slowly has an uptick. The majority of New Yorkers now support congestion pricing. Why? Because they've seen how it's improved their quality of life.
But it takes political courage to bring it in.
It takes political courage, and it took 2 years for us to kind of get John Tory there. He finally supported it. He lobbied City Council in order to get the votes to get it passed. And then, of course, at the pressure of suburban voters, Kathleen Wynne, who was then the premier, flipped. And I've never forgiven her for that because, today people say, oh, look at the traffic in the city. It's, an absolute mess. And, I kind of sit there and I say, yeah, we knew this was going to happen. That's literally why we were arguing for congestion pricing. We're adding a ton more people. We can't add more cars.
On the chance that the former premier is watching this program, she would want me to say, Maddie, that yes, I wasn't going to allow congestion pricing to come in until we had adequate alternatives in place, adequate transit in place for people to use if it was a disincentive to bring your car into the city. Is that a reasonable argument?
I think it is, and I think we can be investing in the transit quickly. We're building the big mega projects. Those take time. Those take years. In this city, they take decades. But what we've seen in places like London is they brought in bus service, improved bus service right away. 300 new buses right away. They dropped the fares. They made it much easier. We could also be doing much more around carpooling. So we have to get away from this idea that there's always going to be, if we can just get the transit in place. I was in a class yesterday, and someone in the class was talking, they're from Paris, and they were talking about even in Paris, they think that they don't have enough public transit. Well, if Paris doesn't have enough public transit, then where in the world do they? That has got to be one of the best public transit systems in the world. And I think for us, we're building out. We're in the midst of the biggest transit building boom in a generation. And I think that's positive. We have to be thinking now about pricing as the other side of that coin that enables us to pay for that transit and encourages people to use it.
I must confess, I thought you would be more violently opposed to this idea. And you don't seem to be unless you're couching it very carefully.
Well, I think that, it's not our role to sort of pick winners and losers, as you talked about earlier. I think there are a few things that we can't ignore, right? There's an affordability issue right now. We're in a difficult economic situation, so these conversations do not go over well. The political will isn't there. It is actually law. The current premier and the Ontario government brought in laws about not implementing tolls on Ontario highways and what was Toronto highways, the Gardiner and the DVP. I think that the current government is looking at bringing in all the different solutions in terms of how people get around, and then the conversation of how do you change behavior is something different. I think for us is that we say congestion charging has been discussed for a long time. There are lots of tools in the toolbox. Congestion charges alone isn't going to solve congestion.
Not solve it, but it sounds like if New York's a good example, it will improve things.
Definitely, and I think we've talked about the other examples that have shown that there are improvements to be had. But again, all of those jurisdictions put things in place first, things that we've been reluctant to put in place. And as Maddie said, that you can improve bus service. There are better, more efficient ways to use the transportation system now, whether it be ramp metering, technology. Recently the Toronto Region Board of Trade, it talked about technology at intersections around, blocking the box. And we know the City of Toronto has implemented a number of measures and is in the process of updating their congestion management plan.
Okay, let me pick up on that with another Jennifer here, because I was going to quote Deputy Mayor Jennifer McKelvey, who said the city's not in favor, the city staff are not in favor of congestion charges, and that the city instead is going to hire more traffic agents for the city's busiest intersections. Start with this. Why would the city staff oppose this as a recommendation?
Honestly, I think it's a very political recommendation. I don't think it's definitely not based on data and evidence, because if you go to the data and evidence, you very clearly see that congestion pricing combined with a series of other critical initiatives, such as investing in bus service, such as concerted car share programs, which are very easy to do now with technology. There's an app for that.
Yeah.
That is truly the only way to reduce the volume of cars on city streets. It's a complete absurdity. I'm sure you've covered induced demand on this program in the past. It's a complete absurdity that you can move cars more quickly and somehow that would reduce congestion because you'll just add more cars. The only way is to control the number of cars on city streets.
And if you do put more traffic agents at busy intersections, will that do anything?
Well, the irony is that if we better respect pedestrian flows, and we have enormous volumes of pedestrian flows in the core of the city, it should slow down traffic even more because you'll be giving more time over to pedestrians and to pedestrian flows. And there's a bit of a battle going on right now on our city streets between pedestrians and cars. So great, you're going to get 3 more cars through the intersection, woohoo! Like that's not changing anyone's commute time.
That don't impress me much, as someone once said.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's not changing any commute times. I like it because it'll make things safer, but we should have no illusions that anyone is getting anywhere faster.
So I'm going to make Maddie the king for their day here. If you could bring in a congestion pricing system for the capital city of the province of Ontario, what would it look like?
So let's start with what we were just talking about. I think some of these smaller measures, these are table stakes. We should be doing them as a matter of course. Of course, we should be cleaning up the intersections. Construction, we need to make sure that the construction is going a lot faster. There's so much frustration. Technology, yes, let's use technology. But as Jen said, these are around the margins. We have too many cars and not enough space, and that is not going to change with these measures. So the measure that's been used in other cities is a cordon type of charge where you draw a boundary around the downtown core, and cars, every time they come in, they pay a charge. I'm not totally convinced that that's the right approach for Toronto. I think we have broader issues around the whole region, especially on our major highways. So I would be looking at bringing in a common charge on what I think of as the inner ring of the highways. The 401, the 427, the Don Valley Parkway, and the Gardiner Expressway. Bring in a charge so that it's even, so that it doesn't favor one area or another. It's not just targeting suburban commuters who are coming into the downtown core, but also those coming across the top of the city. It helps with truck movements, which are major coming through the 401 corridor. And I think that could achieve many of the benefits that we're talking about unclogging our major arteries and also making it easier to get around.
Just a dumb logistical question here. Does that mean we all have to have a transponder in our cars now, and there's a sensor that picks it up and dings you as you drive through? Is that how it works?
There are different ways of doing this. One is a sensor. There's increasingly satellite technology, which is being used in Singapore. I know there are concerns about privacy, but let's be totally honest. We're all walking around with a spy balloon in our pocket with the cell phones. We're being tracked everywhere already. So to think that the congestion charge or that's a privacy issue now in 2025, I think that issue is much less. We should be aware of it. We need to make sure it's being taken care of. But I think at this point, we can guard against the privacy issues and make sure that this is implemented well.
Okay, I'm transferring the crown from your head to Teresa's head. I'm going to make you the king or the queen for the day, whichever title you prefer. What do you think of the idea she's put on the table?
I think that is less likely to happen because that is where the biggest opposition is, turning existing highways into tolled lanes or tolled highways is highly opposed by Ontario drivers.
Politically, it's not on.
And politically,
Park
it's not viable. I think that what needs to happen first is some of these measures. I think there needs to be constant communication about this issue. You know, what they did in New York was have websites that talked about the projects that the money would fund. But again, leading up to that is there has to be a clear understanding, recognition that there's a problem. People know they're sitting in congestion, or their commute times have changed or are longer. The way we talk about congestion and commute times is a little bit different to the general public. And I think that before you start talking to people about something that they see as punitive, what are the sort of the carrots that you can entice people to start thinking about either their behaviors. So, you know, bring back things like transit rebates on taxes, you know, do things that really incent people to want to make those options. Transit has to be consistent and reliable. If transit is not consistent and reliable, the view that you can get out of your car to take transit on a regular basis isn't going to happen, and then tolls are only viewed as a punishment.
What would your congestion pricing scheme look like?
Am I a king for a day or
take the
queen for a
crown
day?
from Teresa for a second.
Well, because it's an important question, because there's two different answers as to how to approach this. If you're approaching it as what would I do with my magic wand versus what is politically palatable, because those are two completely different things. And I think it is important to note that New York City started this journey in 1971 as a result of air quality issues. And this has been on the table for, that's my entire life. My entire life, New York City has been trying to figure out how to advance this. It has been on the cusp of being advanced, and then it's been canceled by subsequent governors. So in some ways, maybe we're just at the very beginning of our journey, which is why it's so important to continue talking about it and building, I think, understanding of the potential positive impacts and the various ways that it can be structured.
Would you be tolling the highways?
Well, definitely. I actually...
And the city?
You know, no. I think... So it's an interesting question. I really liked Maddie's proposal. It changed my mind a little bit. But I do think we're a bit of a different beast. And in particular, with the continued regional sprawl, the vast majority of the congestion in the city right now is 905 drivers. It's not City of Toronto drivers, it's 905 drivers. We discovered this when we did the Young Next in North York study, and we discovered that 75% of the drivers coming through the core of North York were coming from outside of the city. Most of the people who lived in the area were getting on transit. So that means it is really a suburban problem. And as the region continues to sprawl under this government, it means it only gets worse and worse.
But politically, Jennifer, how do you toll highways and not the actual city of Toronto itself, like the inner core of the city?
Well, I think it's very tricky, but I do, you know, and there are places that have done it. Like I think Singapore's system is completely different than London's system. And New York's system is really fascinating because they have like 1,400 points of entry where they take a photograph of your license plate, 1,400 points of entry where they're actually where you can potentially get charged. But then they do all kinds of other interesting things that are a result of years and years of negotiation. For example, if you're low income, you only pay 50% of the toll. If you go over certain bridges, it reduces the amount of the congestion relief charge because they want to try and redirect traffic to underutilized infrastructure. Like they're really using it to...
And is that working?
It's working.
It's
absolutely working. And residents are supporting it, importantly, politically. And they didn't support it before, and they're supporting it now. And so the question, I think, for us is, in some ways, it's a very technical question. You're asking about what should be told. And at this point in time, I'm not sure what the answer is to that question. I think there's a lot of technical work that needs to be undertaken. And it's sort of different, I would say, from what we were proposing probably, I think it was 7 years ago now that we proposed this. I think my answer has changed. But I do think there's this balancing act of what is the system that will deliver the best quality of life outcomes, and what is the system that we can get past, right? That's the political question. And there's an interplay between those two things, and you have to ask that question in order to advance a solution. The other really critical thing that New York City has done, which is really something they've done over the past 10 years is they very directly linked the revenue to improvements in transit. So one of the reasons it was canceled in 2021, it came back in 2024. One of the reasons it came back was because they basically said, look, we can't make any capital improvements to the subway system. The subway system is falling apart. So very different from 1971, where this was about air quality. It was now our subway system is crumbling without this revenue. And that was how they built political support for it. And in January, they took in $48 million, and they're well on their way to advancing really significant capital improvements in the transit system. So there's kind of this dance that takes place between what is the best in a vacuum, if I'm a king, what I would do, versus what is going to be politically palatable to get a pilot in place, because we know if we get a successful pilot in place, we can begin to build support. And I do believe also amongst suburban drivers, you've got to get the pricing right as well. If the pricing is way too high, you're going to have a problem. And if it's too low, it's also not going to work. So getting the pricing right, and again, that's something that, you know, the technical people that Maddie works with are good at figuring out. But you've got to get that sweet spot in terms of pricing right.
One thing that never changes, the clock on this program. And it says we're out of time. That's Jennifer Keesmaat, the former chief planner for the City of Toronto, now CEO, Collective Marquee. Also thanks to Teresa Di Felice from CAA, South Central Ontario, and Maddie Simiatiki from the University of Toronto. Great to have you three here at our table at TVO tonight. Thank you. Last month's 44th general election seems to have been a bit of a snooze fest for most Ontarians. More than half of us didn't vote, and the polls essentially didn't move throughout the writ period. But tonight's guests probably didn't mind at all that Doug Ford called an election 16 months early, and that's because they all won for the first time. So let's welcome 4 of the 5 new Liberal MPPs who helped the Red Team achieve official party status for the first time in 7 years. And here they are in alphabetical order. Rob Serjanik, he is the new MPP for Ajax. Lee Fairclough, she is the new MPP for Etobicoke Lakeshore. Jonathan Sow, the new MPP for Don Valley North. And Tyler Watt, the new MPP for Nepean. We should also mention that Stephanie Smythe was the 5th new Liberal MPP elected, but she was unable to join us today. But we're delighted to have you 4 with us here at Yonge and Eglinton for what might be, I guess, your first interview. Some of you aren't even sworn in yet to office, so here we go. Tyler, to you first. Your riding, Nepean, has been Conservative for the last 30 years. What the heck made you think a Liberal could win that seat?
Well, it all started in 2022 when I ran the first time. You know, not many people had hope that we would win, but I knew I had to at least try. I was born and raised in Nepean. I really care about that community. I work there as a nurse, and I see firsthand what's going on with our hospitals and healthcare system. So even though, yes, it was Conservative for nearly 30 years, I knew we had to at least try, and the people of Nepean spoke this time around.
How many did you win by?
About 5,000.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm quite over the moon about it.
Okay. Lee, to you next. You ran in 2022, lost by just over 800 votes.
Yes.
Really tight. At what point did you decide that you wanted a rematch with Christine Hogarth, who, of course, is the former Conservative member you beat?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us back. Certainly our discussion last time after the election was a different one. But in that conversation, we talked about needing to keep rebuilding. And I would say that the team that I worked with after the last election, 2 days after, brought me to the back, stacked up the signs and said, we need to start working now to make sure that we can win this.
So you were going again right away?
I said to them, whether it's me or somebody else, we are going to make sure that we have a really good effort here in Etobicoke Lakeshore. So we started working with the PLA, with that team, and starting to prepare. And then it became clear there was going to be an early election call of some sort, and then I went forward for the nomination last October.
Would you win by this time?
Oh, this time it was 4,500 votes.
Okay, big victory for you. Now let's get this on the record, because I, being a Hamiltonian, am well aware that the first ever female cabinet minister in Canadian history, Ellen Fairclough, is from Hamilton, and this was in the Diefenbaker government a long, long time ago. And Sheldon, bring the shot up here. I was in Hamilton this past weekend. I got a picture of this just so I could ask you this question. There is a building in Hamilton named after Ellen Fairclough, the first ever female cabinet minister. True or false? You are or are not related to her?
I am not related.
Oh,
sadly, and
I'm
I
so
looked for the
disappointed.
opportunity to be related to her, but I have read her biography.
Oh, okay, very
And
good.
she's a pretty remarkable
And
woman.
you say Fairclough, she pronounces it
say
Fairclough.
Fairclough,
Okay,
yes.
there we go.
Yeah.
Rob, I will confess on election night, we watched the returns come in this studio and in your riding, and everybody at the table thought, this makes no sense at all. The Tories are holding every seat in Halton, in Peel, in York regions that they won last time, but they are losing this seat in Ajax. How did that make sense?
I think a couple things. In the last election, the vote total was not that much of a difference between the Conservative and the Liberal. And in this campaign, we listened to residents and we ran a very locally focused campaign. So it was issues like the Greenbelt. Folks were very upset about that. It was around Express Go train service and the hospital in the community as well that, we heard many time and time again about the challenges that were going there. So we ran a very locally focused campaign speaking about local issues and folks responded to that and they sent me to Queen's Park. So happy to be there.
What'd you win by?
331 votes.
Tight.
Tight.
Did you know on election night you were going to win?
I knew it was going to be close. I just didn't know which side of the coin it was going to fall on.
And it fell on yours.
It did.
There we go. Okay, Jonathan, your riding was interesting because you ran, of course, not only against a progressive conservative nominated candidate, but against the former sitting member who ran again as an independent. And I guess the question is, given that they probably split the center-right vote, is that how you won?
Well, I think how I won was making sure that I was able to connect with my constituents, right? This is all about talking to our neighbors and making sure that we have a message that fits what their priorities are.
Fair to say, though, that if the former conservative candidate, then running it as an independent, didn't run, you probably don't win?
Look, I think, again, it's all about the message to make sure you're connecting with your constituents and you're actually delivering on what their priorities are. I wasn't worried about this game or the infighting, the political inside baseball. I focused 100% on making sure we ran a disciplined campaign and we listened to what the people of Don Valley North had to say. And this is the result, and I'm really happy to get to work.
What'd you win by?
About 2,000 votes.
Okay. Well, okay, that's the good news for you four. Now I get to bring up the bad news. For the fifth straight year, you Liberals do not have a leader who has a seat inside the Ontario legislature. Bonnie Crombie, of course, contested Mississauga East Cooksville and did not win. Lee, how problematic is that for your party?
I think at this stage, I mean, we were thrilled to some degree in some of the outcomes of this election. The first is we got 30% of the popular vote, and we have official party status. So we've achieved a lot in that. As you've seen, we are in full support of Bonnie continuing as our leader, and she will continue to do the work of continuing to build across the province. The caucus has been, is used to working with Bonnie in this way as well, and I think for those of us at Queen's Park, as she is out across the province, we've got to make sure we're learning and hearing from her what's important. So it can only help us to do our jobs better, I believe, at this stage, and we keep going.
Should she stay on as leader?
Yeah.
You agree?
Absolutely. And I did want to note that, this isn't without political precedence in Canada. Actually, Canada's longest serving Prime Minister, Mackenzie King, in two separate elections, lost his own seat and then came back to be Prime Minister,
Yes, he
right?
did.
So I think there's great things ahead for the Ontario Party and great things ahead for our leader, Bonnie Crombie.
Tyler, you want to stay on as leader?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say there's more work to be done outside the legislature. We now have an amazing group of Liberal MPPs that are there to hold the Ford government accountable in the legislature. And when we're not there, we're going to be out and about throughout Ontario, and that's what Bonnie's going to be doing. She came to Nepean so many times I lost count, not only during this election, but beforehand as well, right? It is that grassroots movement. It is listening to people in your constituency, getting those local issues down and representing them, and that's how we become victorious again.
Now, you came third again. This is 3 elections in a row that the Liberals came third in the seat count. Admittedly, Lee, you're right, much better in the total vote count, almost 30% of the total vote. You have official party status right now which is new, more than 12 seats. You haven't had that in 3 elections. What does that mean, Rob?
It means that we're going to have a lot more resources in the legislature in terms of preparing for debates in the legislature and as well doing the work both in our ridings but also around the province. And that means going into other ridings. That means having the time and the ability for us to be able to talk to other folks and encourage them to come over to the Liberal fold next time, but also listen to them. So we'll have the resources and we'll be effective as the people's opposition at Queen's Park.
I'm hearing this expression. I heard your leader use it at the press conference, the people's opposition. What does that actually mean, Lee?
Well, I think that, we saw the way people voted in this election. Again, it was 30% were supportive of Liberals. Didn't translate in the same way in the seat count, but we really do believe that there were more and more people that were compelled and inspired by what we were offering. And we're going to keep working to serve people throughout this next 4 years.
Jonathan, do you feel more legit being an official party now as opposed to 7 independents, which is what you were before?
I think we shouldn't underestimate how important this accomplishment was in this election, right? 30% of the vote, over 1.5 million Ontarians chose the Ontario Liberal Party as their voice in the Ontario legislature. Now, were the results what we had hoped of or what we had dreamt of? No. But we shouldn't for 1 second discount how important this change is, right? We have more time on the floor. We have more seats in the House. We have party status. This is huge, and we're really excited to use this momentum and keep going forward to deliver for the people of Ontario.
As excited as you all are, you understand it's my job to pour a little cold water on your parade here, so that's what I'm going to do. Tyler, okay, yes, the Liberals can boast up to 30%, but a very inefficient vote, and the NDP, with a lot fewer votes than you, is still the official opposition. What's wrong with your party still?
Well, I think, we are coming from having non-party status. And like Jonathan said, it is massive that we got this. There was a time where I worked at Queen's Park in between my 3rd and 4th year of nursing school for Missy Hunter after this was in 2019. So I know what it's like to be, seen as independent and not have those resources. So I'm beyond excited that we now have that. And I can't wait to see what we're going to bring over the next 4 years. And that's really going to set us up for success in the next election.
Okay, I want to ask each of you, because I know I sort of jokingly said off the top it was a bit of a snooze fest election because the public opinion surveys really didn't change at all during the writ period. But you guys were out there knocking on tens of thousands of doors in the worst weather, and it was so cold. I heard so many stories about not even being able to get lawn signs knocked into people's front lawns. I'd like from each of you the weirdest thing that happened during the course of the campaign. What's the weirdest thing you encountered during the course of running for office? Who's got a story? Okay, Rob, start us off.
I've been knocking on doors in general for many years, been in politics for a long time, so nothing really kind of takes me aback anymore, knocking on doors. Although I think this is the first election where I was really knocking in snowstorms and blizzards. So I got that comment a couple times where it's like, I can't believe you're out here. I can't believe you're out here in this storm with massive snowfalls happening behind. So I think that was probably something that stood out to me.
Jonathan?
I wouldn't say it's a weird thing, but one of the things I love most about knocking on doors, you're in your own neighborhood, your own community, you're knocking on doors. These are the places that I've grown up in. And I came across my 5th grade teacher. So my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Marshall, if you're out there, hi, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall said, this is exciting. I'm so glad. And he said to me, I'm shocked that you're running for office because when you were a kid, you were the quietest young man. And now you're running for office, right? So that just shows how much a community, how much an education, how much our friends and family have that impact on us. And then we give back to our own community. And he reminded me, look, teachers are the reason why you are where you are. So make sure when you get to Queen's Park, you're fighting every day to invest in good healthcare, our nurses and our doctors, and in teachers so we all have a good education.
What school?
Bryan Elementary.
Was he any good?
Oh, he was fantastic.
Okay. Lee, something weird happened during the writ period?
Well, I think, again, going back to what's the winter campaign, I was pretty impressed and grateful to the number of people that were going to come out, even that day after the huge snowfall that we had. We had 10 of us out there in the snow, multiple teams and buildings. So I think if that was a surprise that there was so much willingness actually for people to come out and what was motivating them to come out. I think you always have the situation where one day we were out and one of my volunteers did talk to somebody at the door next to me and then the door closed and she said, well, that person didn't have their pants on. So there's always one of those on the campaign. And he said, well, she said, luckily I worked in a doctor's office for years, so nothing surprises me. So there's always those.
Can I say, you've funnily enough anticipated my next question, which is, I have yet to speak to a political candidate who during a writ period did not see somebody naked at the door.
There's
It
always
happens all the
something.
time,
Yeah.
which is a little weird.
It
Anyway,
is.
Tyler,
It
you got
is.
one.
That also happened to me, especially during the winter. It's more shocking, right? Summer, I kind of get it, but weirdest thing for me, I think, was like for me as a nurse, it's really important to get those personal connections with people. And doing this in the depths of winter, it's dark out by like 4:35 p.m. You know, people are strangers knocking on their door to talk about the worst thing in the world, politics with them, right? So them just creaking open the door a smidge, that barrier and challenge of like, okay, I now have, 10 seconds to make that initial connection, which was way easier, I think, in the 2022 election. But, I hope we don't ever have to do a winter election again, I'll say that.
Well, Rob, I was going to ask, I know there were days when you're out there door knocking, it's -10, it's -15. Would people answer the door and actually talk to you?
I was surprised, actually. People did answer the door, and we did have those conversations. Sometimes they're a little bit shorter. I did find on the days where people were out with their snowblower or shoveling, they weren't as engaging to talk to that day just because of the amount of snow that we got. And to your point around lawn signs, we actually waited to put up signs a little bit, and we were just putting them in the tops of snowbanks.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Could you get signs in the ground?
Most campaigns that I know of bought rebar. So we purchased rebar instead, and that was the way to get those large signs into the ground easier. But small signs, snowbank is, half my height, just top the snowbank.
Did you get signs in the ground?
Yeah, we did with wood stakes. We had a terrific
Wood
sign
stakes.
crew, and they perfected the drilling. It required drilling. It took a lot more
Drilling?
time. Drilling, absolutely.
Because the ground was like
The ground
concrete.
is frozen, and so, but it paid off. The wood signs kept everything above, so as we got more and more snow, you could still see they were still visible.
Okay, here's my next unhelpful topic. You ready? Here we go. If you look at the map of the province of Ontario, and if the three opposition parties, the Liberals, the New Democrats, and the Greens, had been, let's just say, more strategic in where they chose or didn't choose to run candidates, you would have been able to hold, the supposition is you could have held Doug Ford to a minority government, and in that case, you could have defeated his government and taken over in some kind of, who knows what, coalition, supply and confidence agreement, bill-by-bill agreement, whatever. But for whatever reason, your party, the New Democrats, and the Greens all want to run full slates of candidates in all 124 ridings. The result is a progressive conservative majority government for the third straight time. Question, Tyler, do you so-called progressive parties, all in opposition, need to get your acts together so that you maybe get the outcome that you want to have, as opposed to a party with 43% of the vote getting 100% of the power?
Yeah, I completely understand, and many people have voiced this throughout the election and after the fact. But I think the biggest thing is that not only do we need not just strategic, but it's up to us to inspire people to get out and vote. That's the biggest thing that I took from the 2022 election, was it is better to get people excited and hopeful to vote for someone instead of against someone.
And yet half the people didn't vote. More than half the people didn't vote again.
True. But then you look at this awesome group of people who did come out with wins, and I think that we really need to focus in on that local, movement and get people excited, and really just invest in our candidates and make sure that the party stays message focused and supporting our candidates across the province.
Just to be clear, I'm not advocating this, but I am inundated by emails from people and phone calls from people who say, if these three parties would stop cannibalizing the anti-Tory vote and get their act together, they could organize something that could defeat the progressive conservatives, which is what you four told us for 30 straight days you wanted to do. Rob, what about it?
I think that assumes that, every voter that supports each party is then just automatically going to switch to another party. And frankly, I don't really buy that. People will vote based on their opinions, based on their values, and based on the campaigns that candidates and leaders are putting forward. So in Ajax, yes, we did run, anti-Doug Ford, but at the same time, we also spoke about what we wanted to do in the community and the work we wanted to do together.
Okay, but you won by 300 and how many?
331 votes.
331 votes. If there were How many votes did the New Democrat candidate get in your riding?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact number.
Probably 4 or
They
5%?
dropped about 9%. I went up about 9%, and the Conservative went up about 3%.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I'll give you an example. In another riding where there was a candidate, I think, for the NDP that didn't run or that dropped out, we saw that seat actually still stayed Conservative, and that's in the city of Toronto.
That's Eglinton Lawrence, and it was 170 some odd votes.
Yeah.
It was close.
It was.
So are you saying that you don't think any of the seats would have changed had you guys been more strategic about the way you did things?
I think it's hard to predict, and to be honest, I think we can do a whole session on this topic as well.
And I would just add, and I know that this was happening in Etobicoke Lakeshore because people would voice it to me. I think that people are still making choices to vote strategically one way or another. Yeah. And the number of times I got asked by NDP supporters and by Conservatives actually looking for a change, the question was, who is most likely to bring a change here and why? And that, again, going back to how are you inspiring people, I think that carries a lot of weight. So I don't think we can always assume that if we were to do this, that we would have the kind of outcome you're suggesting.
You're totally right. We can't make any assumptions. But, for example, in Parry Sound, Muskoka, the Greens came within, I think, about 1,000, 1,500 votes of knocking off a cabinet minister. And the Liberals and New Democrats in that riding took 3,500 votes. Now, you can't tell me that if those 3,500 votes that went Liberal or New Democrat, I don't think the most of them would have gone for the Tories. They would have gone for the Greens to knock off the Tory.
But do they show up to vote?
Well, these
question,
are all the
right?
questions,
Yeah.
right? These are all questions. Jonathan.
No, for me, it's about the strength of your argument, right? So when I go to a door knocking in Don Valley North and someone says, well, I'm going to vote Green this time. And I just tell them, I respect that. I respect that you have a choice that you've made and maybe a party that you prefer. But listen to what I have to say. Listen to what our party is putting forward, and you'll see why we are the best option to defeat Doug Ford. And that's because the Ontario Liberal Party has always been that big tent party right in the center of Ontario political politics. And that's what's going to win. So right now, what we saw in the last election, 30% of Ontarians in this election voted for us. This is only going to increase, Steve. We're starting something here that's amazing, and I'm so excited to get down to Queen's Park and really get to work.
I'm just wondering, though, Tyler, whether or not you find it an inconsistent message to say for 30 straight days during the writ period, Doug Ford is unfit to govern. He should not be our premier. We are doing everything in our power to try and knock him off his perch so that we can get in there instead. But you won't cooperate with other opposition parties to make that happen. Mm-hmm. There are going to be people who see that and say, come on, you guys, get your act together and do something to work together to try to make that happen. Elizabeth May has said federally she would like to work with the other opposition parties to ensure the Conservatives are not elected federally. Mm-hmm. Do you have to do that provincially?
Well, I think it's important to people in Ontario that all parties work together anyways. This is certainly, like Rob said, a conversation that we could have, endlessly. But, even when I was at the door in Nepean, I got the vote from NDP voters, from Conservative voters, from Green voters, from non-voters, first-time voters. And it all came down to them wanting a champion for Nepean at Queen's Park. Me saying I will work together with other parties to make sure that the voices of Nepean is heard, that we're going to address the healthcare system crisis that we're going to...
That's you in Nepean. I know somebody in Mississauga who lost by 20 votes. And if there was not a New Democrat in the race or a Green in that race, that seat would have been Liberal instead of Conservative. Mm-hmm. You got to give me that, right?
Yeah, I admit it. Listen, I'm biased. I'm from Nepean. This is all I've known the last 30 days.
Okay. We got about 4 minutes and change to go here. And I liked it. We've done a number of programs in the past on this station where we have rookie MPPs in, and I'm always curious about what they want to get done while they're at Queen's Park. So I'm going to ask each of you to complete the following sentence. My time in public life, however long it lasts, will have been worth it if... Lee, what?
If I can make sure that we protect our public health care system and we improve access to family doctors, and we make sure that this is front and center for our provincial government. It's a core part of their job, and we need vision and we need solutions.
We should say as well, you're not just doing talking points here. Your background is you worked in a hospital.
I've worked 27 years in healthcare, my whole career, and I love it. I could have done it until I was 80. But I'm really deeply concerned about where it's been going. I heard that a lot in Etobicoke Lakeshore throughout the election as well, and so that will be just one of many things that I hope to accomplish in this role, but that's the main driver for me.
My time in public life, however long it lasts, will be worth it if what?
every child has an opportunity to succeed. So I bring that back to my upbringing. My mom was a single mom. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment. So, life wasn't always, as easy as it can be. Went to some really great public schools. Went to a great university, had a lot of opportunities after employment-wise. So for me, it's ensuring every child has that opportunity to succeed. So that's the education, that's the job, that's the jobs, and that's the innovation.
Can you make that happen in opposition?
I think we can advocate for that, absolutely. And that means holding the government to account on issues, when those topics come up, but also presenting an alternative vision and alternative solutions, and frankly, pushing them to do more, because I think this government needs to do a lot more in these areas.
Jonathan.
I would say that it'd make it all worth it if I can say that my neighbors truly believe that every single day I went to Queen's Park and fought for their priorities. I mean, I think so many of us, we're rookie MPPs, right? We're brand new. We haven't taken our seats yet. But I think in political life, sometimes you get caught in that bubble, right? Where you start to focus on priorities that may not be the priorities of your neighbors who elected you. So I want to make sure that every single day when I go down to Queen's Park, the voice that I'm speaking with isn't my voice. It's not the voice of my party necessarily. It's the voice of my neighbors who elected me, and to make sure that we speak of the priorities that mean the most to them, and that's healthcare, making sure they have a family doctor and houses that they can afford and feel safe living in.
My time at Queen's Park will have been worth it if what?
Well, without just repeating what everyone has said here, because I do agree with all of that, I have two main things. Number one, it is protecting our public healthcare system and making it a system that people can thrive in and are proud of. We have a lot of work to do on that, and I'm so excited to be at Queen's Park to make that happen. And number two, it is to give people hope again. The biggest thing that I took from this election was giving people hope, that they feel that they're going to be represented, that politics doesn't need to be this mudslinging system where nothing gets accomplished. People are excited about this change in opinion, and I want to take that and run with it.
I'm going to ask one last question of three of you. Tyler, how old are you?
I'm 34.
You are 30?
As on my literature.
34 years old. Rob, how old are you?
36.
Jonathan?
37.
This is very much a new generation in public life, which you don't always see. It's not necessarily usual for 30-somethings to run and win. How does that feel?
It feels good, but I think, more importantly, I think it's about a new approach to politics and a different perspective. As society evolves, as we get older, we bring different experiences with us. So, I think the experience that Tyler, John, myself, and many, I think, the other new MPPs that are in our generation, I think will bring a different approach and, frankly, vision to the province.
Did you ever think, gosh, I wonder if I'm too young to do this job?
No, to be honest. It's just, I've never really questioned this crazy adventure that I've been on, right? It started off me just talking on Twitter about what Doug Ford was doing. That was back in 2018, and now 2025, I'm going to Queen's Park. And running in these elections twice now, it was seeing the excitement from young people. People in politics love to say young people don't vote. It's because they need a reason, right? So when they see a young person at the door who says, I get what you're going through, there's like, you know what? You'll be my first vote.
Cool. I want to thank the four of you for coming into TVO tonight and sharing your views. And as I would say to all the rookies who've done these shows over the years, good luck to you. And
thank you.
I hope you have a good, enjoyable time at Queen's Park.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
The TVO program The Thread with Nam Kiwanuka is now heading into season number 4. Let's get the lowdown on what viewers can expect with the show's host. There's Nam Shine right there. Hello.
Hi, Steve.
Lovely to see you again in our studio. Tell us some of the stories you're going to be working on this year on The Thread.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So this year we've traveled to Wawa, Sault Ste. Marie, Barrie, London. And I have to look down the topics because menopause. This season we focused on healthcare, gun violence, deep fakes, the climate crisis.
I'm learning so much about you. I learn so much about you when we have these little
Keeping
get-togethers.
Keeping it 100. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so I interrupted there.
Yeah.
Go through that list. That's a very serious list of stuff you got going on.
Healthcare, gun violence, deep fakes, the climate crisis, dating, and immigration.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there, I know when you do these stories, you talk to lots of people and the subjects are all pretty heavy, but is there one that stays with you more than any other?
Above and beyond deep fakes. We spoke to some teen girls in Toronto who had their faces manipulated through AI on nude bodies. And the images were shared. And this was done allegedly by a classmate. And of course, the impact to their mental health, their well-being was immense. And we're really grateful that they spoke to us. And in the deepfakes episode, I learned a lot. I learned that because of how AI and technology, how fast it's moving, that the law is actually trying to play catch up.
Can't keep up.
Can't keep up. So unfortunately, these girls, the law couldn't really help them. And so we take a deep dive into deep fakes and talk about the implications, because we're parents. And having to talk to your children about the dangers of just putting an innocent picture online and how that could be manipulated by bad actors, I think it's something that everybody needs to know.
It's interesting. My older kids never had to deal with any of this. My youngest did, because she's, as they say, a digital native as opposed to a digital immigrant. Kids today have got so much, stuff that we could not have imagined when we were kids that they have to deal with, particularly this, eh?
Yeah, it's really, really hard what they're having to navigate, and then to just speak to them and what this means for their future prospects, because we know that the internet never forgets. And so I think the people that we spoke to, there's a lot of tech companies, they need to be more responsible. They need to be more proactive in protecting young people from situations like this, because even as an adult, we grew up in a time where I didn't have to worry if I did something in my 20s, and I did stuff in my 20s because you're in your 20s, right? But you shouldn't be penalized. You shouldn't have to have that follow you for the rest of your life.
Is the law able to keep up at all with what's going on?
We find out that it's having a hard time, and so this is why it's important for us to do this show.
You got around, eh? You went to a lot of places far away from Yonge and Eglinton.
And that's the thing about the thread. We want to go to people in the province. This is their stories, and we want to go to them. And it's important. Toronto is not Ontario.
Right.
Ontario is very big, very diverse, and it's important for us to be in different communities. And we did that too with healthcare. We went up north because the situation there is really different from here in southwestern Ontario.
For sure. How can viewers tune in and watch what you do?
The first episode of season 4, 7:30 this Wednesday on TVO, and you can always catch up on Sunday at 8:30 p.m. or online on YouTube at The Thread with Nam. I just want to give a shout out to everybody on the team, because TVO is a small team, but we do great work.
Small but mighty.
Small but mighty. So thank you to everybody on the team who worked really hard to make the season happen, including people here in studio who also were camera ops. So thank you, everyone.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Shall we do a preview?
Yes, please.
Here is a preview of Season 4, Episode 1, debuting tomorrow night before the agenda. Roll it.
More extreme heat events.
From extreme heat, non-stop rain, droughts, wildfires, and smoke.
This is big for Ontario. Hamilton, Toronto, Windsor are highly exposed cities.
Nobody can stop a tornado.
I noticed it was raining in the house.
So the roof was gone.
The roof completely gone.
I jumped in the truck, and all of a sudden chunks of tree were landing on top of the truck, and I drove like crazy to get out of there.
The evidence is in front of our face.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. Does Europe still have a reliable partner in the United States? We'll consider that question tomorrow with a senator from the Italian Parliament. Hope you'll join us for that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.